You know, when people talk about the Middle East, they're consumed about what's going on post the 7th of October. Or if we had this conversation last year in September, it's about the unfair treatment that the Jews do against the Arabs. I mean, it's ridiculous. But now in the news, you're hearing that the world savior in the Middle East is now Israel, and that the Syrian regime is welcoming Israel's support, or maybe, we're not sure. After World War I, France acquired the mandate over the northern portion of what was the Ottoman Empire. It's a province of Syria. And French administered this until 1946. So that's where Syria came from. So I think it's important to understand where we're talking in the world and how it ever got there, because it didn't exist 1,000 years ago like Israel. Welcome, everybody, to the Rant Network. This is a podcast, unfiltered, unapologetic discussion hosted by myself with David Solomon, or David Solomon with me, which I can just do that now. As we tackle a diverse range of topics with candid conversations and bold opinions. If you've been around me, been around David, let me tell you something. We definitely discover the word bold with highlights. Whether it's breaking down the latest headlines, exploring pop culture, debating politics, or delving into the complexities of modern life, we offer a platform for every perspective. So grab a seat, settle in, and join us on this journey through a thought-provoking rant and meaningful discussion. The Rant Network is where your voice matters, no topics off limits. And I'll be honest with you, we don't edit. David and I talk briefly in a green room, probably talk a little bit at evening once in a while, sparingly, because we don't want to blow up the phone waves. But really, Syria is one of these misunderstood countries where people don't even know who runs Syria. You know, we know in the news where Assad regime gassed thousands of its, citizens. It's on the shores or on the side of Turkey. It's been basically supported by Iran, right? The axis of evil, and Russia. Russia has two massive military bases, which is how it funnels weapons to, Hezbollah and Lebanon. Syria is not an innocent country with innocent civilians like Milwaukee or Kansas City or Detroit. Well, maybe like Detroit, because it does seem like a war-torn country. But that's because the left doesn't really want you to understand the reality on the ground in a Middle Eastern country where democracy, as we know it, doesn't exist. And again, they want you to believe that there's a democratic leader somewhere there, but the word democratic is synonymous with, I don't know, terrorists, Al-Qaeda. I mean, I can't make this shit up. David, I know you were wondering what kind of intro I was going to give you to this one.
No, but Stuart, you start off very well, and I want to applaud you on that one, because what you laid out is completely forgotten. This vast of land, known as the Ottoman Empire, had no borders. It spread thinly across the Middle East, from Turkey, what we know as Turkey today, through the Middle East is what we know of. And when you look at the maps from the 19th century, Stuart, okay, and Mark Twain famously went to this area, aside from calling it, he didn't call it this, but he basically called it a shithole. I mean, he couldn't understand who would live there. But when he went through this entire area, it was filled with tribes. It's tribal. And so the leaders that you saw that emerged in the 20th century, thanks to the concept of divide and conquer by the British and the French, put tribal leaders as heads of the country. That was their way. That's what happened in Jordan. That's what happened in Syria. That's what happened in Saudi Arabia. It happened in other areas. It was not at all countries as you know it today 200 years ago. You're not sure? Read a book by John Loftus. He will tell you all this. It's historic, but we forgot about it. We believe that countries have been around forever. We also believe, Stuart said correctly, that all countries are democratic. There's a democratic system. What a load of hogwash. People. There are less democratic countries than not. Because right now, if you look at what's going on in the Middle East, the only democracy in the Middle East, and we will stress it for the millionth time here, is Israel. Every other country around it might have a prime minister, may have a legislative branch. But as we saw with Assad in Syria, what we've seen in Jordan, what we've seen in Egypt, what we've seen in Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries, is you have a leader, an autocratic leader, and a bunch of elitists who just execute what the leader wants. That's it. It's not democratic. Democratic in a one-party system is not democratic. Please, they'll say, oh, Syria had a vote. One-party system. 90-something% of the vote went, wait, come on. But I'm sidetracking a little bit here. Because again, we talked about this last week, Stuart, is that the world has ignored again that there has been a civil war in Syria for over a decade. And that the world once again has ignored what Assad has done to his people. We talked about that last week. I will stress it again. The world has chosen to ignore it. There's not one UN resolution. There's not one condemnation. There's not one boycott to sanction them. There's no movement in the university. There's no movement in the media. There are no politicians screaming for it. And lo and behold, Stuart, last week, Al-Qaeda rebels, let me remind you, terrorists who've been fighting this war with Assad for over a decade, found their opening. In 11 days, they took over the country because Assad, his power was eliminated, gone. And as you said clearly, he is hiding in Russia right now with political asylum thanks to Putin, him and his family. But Assad didn't even fire a shot, didn't even try to stop the rebels. He took off. And as we wake this morning, people are saying, look, according to Republican Congressman Joe Wilson from South Carolina, quote, this is so significant. The fall of the Assad dictatorship, the ripple effect of it is going to be remarkable. It's truly equivalent to the Berlin Wall, which led to ripple effect of dozens of countries becoming free after 50 years of occupation and totalitarian control. I'm calling a timeout. I'm throwing my red flag on the field. Whoa, slow down. This is exactly what you said about Egypt. In 2008, Obama was excited because here was an opportunity, 2009, 2010, the Muslim Brotherhood took over Egypt. It was going to be the end of the Mubarak rule, it's going to be the fall of all these autocrats in the Middle East. Instead, it was the rise of greater terrorism. Instead, it was the rise of greater problems within Egypt. Mubarak might have been an autocrat and a terror-like leader, but the terrorists that took over were even worse. And that's the fear today in Syria. The devil you know is gone. The devil you don't know is taken over. Stuart, in Afghanistan, we saw this with the Taliban. We've seen this we saw this with Hamas taking over in Gaza. We've seen what Hezbollah has done in Lebanon. This isn't exactly light, folks. This is not the Berlin Wall. Let's slow down. We might have a ripple effect, but if it's not careful, the ripple effect will be more terrorists taking over countries, and the notion of Sharia law will be even more greater impact of that. Stuart, in Afghanistan right now, they're taking away more rights from women. They've eliminated from women any opportunity to get an education, to no longer be doctors. It can't be OBGYNs. They've taken that away because a woman should be in the kitchen and in the bedroom making babies and serving their masters, the men. That's what you've got with the Taliban. If that's what's imposed in these countries, we're not going forward. We're going way backwards. And the world has to slow down. This is not yet a celebration. The change, we have to be very cautious, but we can't celebrate just yet.
I just got to tell you that there's an organization, LGBTQIA, for Syria's rights. People. I mean, I can't begin to tell people, of all walks of life, and the word dreamer, which has been now used synonymous with immigration. We should import this word into every walks of every group that we don't think has the same freedoms as we do, or they actually want it. Women in the broader sense, the Middle East outside of Israel don't have women's rights. Hey, gay, lesbian rights don't exist outside of Israel. They live in fear. You know, I knew someone who was gay and Lebanese and fled Lebanon to go to another country because he was found out as being gay and they wanted to stone the guy. I got to tell you, our interpretation as to what is democracy and what democracy would look like in a Syria, I think you got to know where it comes from. You know, Syria united with Egypt in 1958. It's part of the Arab Republic. It's separated because in one of the bloodiest coups that the Assad family did in the 70s, and has controlled this country with the father, would have been a brother, and now it's the other brother, for 50 years. Not with a let's sort of get a consensus type government, with an iron fist, with a bullet, with gas. It's the only country other than China to gas its own people. Now, why did I leave Germany out? Because they gassed people they claimed that weren't theirs. But Assad regime gassed its own people for dissension. I'm sorry. I know the Democratic Party in the United States would love to gas the mega guys, but the people like Debbie Wasserman Schultz can't control the broader vote in this country. But here we are, a million miles away, trying to talk about peace in a country with terrorists. And David, I'm sorry, Al-Qaeda wasn't the monster that it is today before the Americans abandoned them on the battlefield. So Al-Qaeda's got a unique history that maybe we should actually talk about, because yes, they are the tribal leaders. But those tribal leaders weren't looking for democracy. They were singled out and abandoned by American government and were laid to slaughter. Their vitriolness towards the United States is really handed, as most of the time when Americans get into the weeds as well as the Russians, who were decimated in Afghanistan, as we were embarrassed in Afghanistan, right? The Western world, the communist world, does not understand the Middle Eastern world. That's my conclusion, David.
Actually, the Soviets or the Russians, whatever you want to call it, knew exactly what they were doing, because their goal was to disrupt the Americans, in the 50s and 60s and 70s. This was their goal. And they succeeded by arming, if you think about it, in 1956, they helped Egypt. If you look at 1967, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, armed by the Soviets to go out and attack Israel. 1973, Egypt, Syria. Again, all of the times that you look at in history, the idea was to disrupt the Soviets were trying to disrupt America via Israel. The Middle East has been a conduit, just like other areas, for the Soviets and now the Russians. Now, what's interesting, Stuart, is that Russia's now kind of pulled out. They can't afford it. They don't have the resources now to go and afford it. Iran, which armed Hezbollah and sort of helped Syria, don't have the resources all of a sudden. So this ripple effect that, this Republican congressman who believes in, Russia isn't going away. And I'll tell you something else. When people say, oh, this is a good thing, let me tell you, Israel had to go and blow up a bunch of warehouses that housed chemical weapons. Yes, Assad had chemical weapons in plenty of warehouses in Syria. Okay. Number two, there is a demilitarized zone between Israel and Syria that has actually surprisingly been okay and, let's put in quotation marks, respected for 50 years. It was put in effect in 1974, and they have not had no one's crossed the border. The Syrian army that was occupying that whole area to block its side of the border
took off.
Vacated. Yeah.
They
And
vacated.
Israel went in and took it. Yep. 100%.
Israel had to go in to block it. So we are not out of the woods yet.
No.
And I think that at this point, Stuart, what you said about Al-Qaeda pissing off on the United States and all that, same thing with the Taliban in Afghanistan, same thing in Iraq, same thing. The United States abused the locals and then pulled out. And now you've got a situation where Israel cannot afford another border war. Yemen, the Houthis continue to fire rockets. Hezbollah continues to fire rockets. Hamas is continuing to fight with Israel. It's not over yet. So let's not all pull out the white doves and let's not all create this peace concept and whatever. There's still a lot to do, and we need to be patient and understanding. However, with this, I'm going to however this whole thing. I have to agree with Joe Biden, and I know this is like a shocking thing, but he made a statement saying that Iran made a mistake inflicting a war on Israel through Hamas, through Hezbollah, through the Houthis. Iran never could have imagined the damage and the repercussions of this action. That's shocking, Stuart. I have to agree with Joe Biden. Iran made a mistake.
And that brings us to a close of another episode of the Rant Network. We truly appreciate you tuning in and sharing your time with us. Your support and engagement means everything. We continue to foster closer, open, honest relationships, obviously always thought-provoking. Don't forget, we're here every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, noon Eastern. Stay connected with us on social media. Let us know your thoughts, your questions. PM us, put us on the chat. We're always there. Your feedback helps us shape this community and keeps the conversation alive. Thank you once again for joining us. Until next time, keep the Rams passionate, discussion vibrant, and the ideas flowing. Take care. We'll see you soon. David, any last gestures you would like to send out to our audience today? Just
Ladies and gentlemen, let's just hope. Let's just hope this is the dawn of a new age, a better age, because I think we're all fed up with what's going on in the world. But maybe we'll have to wait till January 20th, Stuart.